Hi everyone, this is Dan, and this is not a comic book again. And let me explain. So, one of the decisions I kind of made a while back with some of my comic book reviews, unless I hate the comic book, like The Boys, in which case I do something a little bit quick and cheap, is I kind of want to practice sequential art with any of these comic book reviews that I do. Just because there's kind of no point to just doing single pieces. I kind of need to really get some drawing time and drawing hours in. That's just the way it is. I'm feeling like it's kind of the next step in the terms of getting better, is just constant practice, which I do. I have actually a sketchbook. One of these days I'll probably show it off in a video, but I need to focus on working on 11 by 17 paper, because that's really what you make comic books on, and really just penciling like crazy, sequential art over and over again. Anyway, to get back on track, this is jimshooter.com. This is Jim Shooter's blog. It's kind of a dead blog. There hasn't really been an update in I believe, probably 4 or 5 years or so. But it is the man himself, Jim Shooter, and a lot of his blog posts and reminisce and sort of articles on storytelling, comic books, and all that kind of stuff. Very fascinating. I highly recommend this website just as a piece of comic book history and resource to a degree. A real comic book resource, not the freaking website, which is a hot mess. But I kind of wanted to do a video on these articles, the 198 cent or the $1.98 storytelling lecture by Jim Shooter, mainly because they'll be quick videos, and I kind of need to keep adding videos to the channel. And number two, they're fascinating. And also I can make a lot of videos every other day just to kind of keep content moving through the channel, which I feel like, I don't know, I want to test to see if the algorithm is going to be affected if I start doing a little bit of content or more consistent content on the channel. The only problem with that is I can't do art, obviously, because that means I would have to literally burn out a sequential page every day, which is pretty tough. Just being honest, I'm just too much of a beginner of an artist at this point. But let's talk about this. The 198 storytelling lecture. For those of you who don't know, Jim Shooter, a very famous figure in the comic book industry, most famous for being the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics during Marvel Comics' heydays in the 80s. He, very much structured Marvel Comics and ran that ship very well, and was you could say so the great storylines and books were created by the writers, the editors, and the artists, but the environment and the background and the organization of all of those books and those great runs in the 80s was really could be heavily credited to Jim Shooter in a way. Not to say he was absolutely essential in all of that, but he had a big part of it, and he had a lot of really good ideas about storytelling. So let's get into it. So by Jim Shooter, this was from 2011, about 9 years ago. Jesus. Storytelling Lecture Series Part 1. Story is probably the most fundamental and important element of entertainment in the world. It's a basic building block. It comes into play in virtually every creative medium. Storytelling is the oldest profession. Don't believe what you've heard. People are telling lies. People were telling lies long before any other business was invented. We're in the same business as Homer was. This business has been around for a long time. I think it's going to be around for a long time. It's going to be here forever because it's something that's built into us, and it's something that we really like. You can always tell someone, is from an older generation because, I don't know if people realize this, especially old timers and boomers, but there's a lot of people, especially young people, who don't know who Homer and even Shakespeare, surprisingly enough, are, which is extremely depressing, honestly. A lot of schools don't teach the classic stuff anymore. In fact, I actually never read the Iliad in any schooling that I had. I read the Odyssey, but the Iliad I never read. In a class, I actually read the Iliad on my own, which I think, honestly, I like the Iliad more than the Odyssey. Anyway, that's literature nerd bullshit. I'm not going to go through that. Let's continue on. Okay, so what is a story? Well, in the simplest possible terms, what a story is what it was, what changed it, and how did it come out. This is kind of a very succinct way to go over kind of like dramatic structure in a way, right? That's what I was taught in school was dramatic structure. You had your introduction and setting. You had your rising action or conflict. Had your climax, falling action, and denouement or whatever. Basically a conclusion, right? And that's what I was taught in high school and college literature. Now, a lot of people have probably been to seminars and read books that say, well, there's an act 1, act 2, act 3. You may have heard a story has to have a middle or beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, no kidding. What does that mean? How does that give you any tool by which to judge whether or not you've done it right? So forget those people. It's what it was, what happened, how did it come out. Is that a formula? No, it's a definition. If it isn't that, it's not a story. Very strong words by Mr. Shooter. Sentences have definitions. A sentence is a complete thought. Shakespeare used sentences. So did the writers of Laverne and Shirley. Didn't limit either of them. It's just a tool. It's just a building block. You've got to know what it is. Then you can manipulate it. Then you can play with it. Very interesting. I like this. This is definitely structured like a lecture. You could kind of imagine someone saying this stuff. Think of it as a unit of language. The smallest unit of our language is a letter. The next unit up is called a morpheme. That's the smallest group of letters that adds meaning, that holds meaning. For instance, the S on the end of a word that makes it plural, that's a word. Or ing, that's a morpheme. Theme. Then, of course, there's words, clauses, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and you build from there. Story is just a bigger unit. Just understand what we're talking about here is just a piece of language. That's a story. It should not limit you. It is simply a building block. Why is that a story? Not because somebody woke up one day and said, that will be what a story is. We're going to write this in Webster's. No, that's a story because it's built into our language. You cannot avoid what a story is. If someone tells you a story and doesn't have one of the pieces, you may not know the stuff I'm telling you, but you know it's not right. I feel like I've made like 10 or 20 videos mentioning this, probably more, honestly, because this is almost the crux of what I complain about in comics. And that is so many comics do not have complete stories. They tell you half a story for the book that you got. So in many cases, you're not really paying, $4.99 or whatever it is for a story. You are paying $4.99 for 1/16 of a story a lot of times. Sometimes, in the case of Jonathan Hickman, maybe 1/30th of a story, considering that's how long it takes him to tell a story. And that is the crux of the problem with American comics right now. You can say like, well, a lot of other types of comic books do this. For example, manga does this a lot, which actually isn't true. If anyone has actually noticed in both my One Piece video, which is probably my most popular one, and the Bleach one, and the next video I'm going to do, which is on Naruto, the first issue of both Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece are all complete stories. So the reality is, even the Japanese follow this rule. Though sometimes they may drag on a story for several issues or long runs, it's usually after they have at least done several, if not many, complete stories. And then the other thing is, in the Japanese case, you are usually buying, for whatever much a Shonen Jump is, multiple stories at one time. So in terms of getting your money's worth, it's a lot better. So they can kind of get away with it. But in the American system, where you sell a single floppy for $4.99, $3.99, whatever it is, or a graphic novel, or whatever it is, you can't do this because, the individual value of that quarter fraction of a story does not justify the price. And it also it doesn't justify the customer satisfaction, right? There's a feeling of completeness, right, when you get into that. You can't tell quarter stories or half stories or whatever, long arcs that you want to tell until you've at least proven to the customer and the reader that you can tell a single story. It's just my opinion anyway. But I think my opinion has been borne out through history in terms of what actually works. Anyhow, let's let's all go out and have a root beer someplace. We'll go into a bar, all of us, and there'll be a big guy sitting at the end of the bar, a big, huge guy, and you just know the guy played football. So we'll walk up to him, we'll say, Bronco, tell us about your biggest game. He'll say, well, it was the state championship. It's late in the fourth quarter. We're down by 6 points, and we're marching down the field. I'm the running back, and we're doing great. I've got this great quarterback handing off to me. On the other side, there's the biggest linebacker in the world, and we're getting around him. We're marching down the field, and then all of a sudden, I fumble, and they got the ball. So here we are. We're going to win, and if we win, the head cheerleader promised she'd go out with me, so I fumble. The coach takes me out, and he's yelling at me and stuff. The time's running out, and our team intercepts a pass on our own 6-yard line. There's a few seconds left. I say, Coach, put me in. I got to get in there. So Coach Rolinski puts him in, and then they hand Bronco the ball, and he breaks through the lines, through the secondary. He's running toward the goal line, and then the biggest linebacker in the universe is standing at the goal line. Time's expired on the clock. He dives for the goal line, and the linebacker dives at him. Yeah. This is actually, basic, but you can kind of see, obviously, you kind of have to be American or into American football to understand what's going on here, because we are talking about American football. I guess I know I have some viewers that are British or from other countries, so I guess the equivalent in soccer or English football, I should say, or I guess football for the rest of the world, would be a striker screwing up and losing or getting stolen or having a couple bad passes, and then they get the pass and they're in stoppage time or whatever, and he makes a great run with only one defender in the way between him and the goalie. Whatever. I did my best attempt at trying to make a soccer analogy, I guess. That's how it is, right? It's stoppage time. Yeah, because the time clicks up in soccer. Anyway, God, I'm going on to your boy Zach spiel right here. We're all wondering whether or not he scored and whether or not he scored. You can't help yourself. Ha ha ha. He scored and he scored. So the girl and the football. You can't help yourself. It's built into the language. Another thing you can't help is if you ask Bronco to tell you a story, he will tell you the situation, what happened to disrupt it, what happened, and then he will tell you how it came out. If he doesn't, you'll be really upset. It's built into the language. You'll automatically tell a story in the correct order if you just let yourself. Keep that in mind. When you tell a story, you're telling what the situation was, what happened to change that situation, and how it came up. What does this mean? Very simple. If you're trying to prove people that you're a competent writer, storyteller, right? Because really that's what comic books are. They're really just another form of storytelling. The medium is, to take paraphrase Frank Miller, it's just as valid as every other medium: television, movies, video games, which is, the more modern thing, novels, all that stuff. It's just a form of storytelling. So if you don't tell a story, it doesn't matter how good your verbiage is, or your language, or your jokes. It doesn't matter how good your dialogue is. It doesn't matter how good your characterization is. It doesn't matter how cool your characters are. It doesn't matter how beautiful the art is, the pencils, the inks, the layouts, the perspective, the coloring. It doesn't matter how good your letterer is. That, kind of random, but still, it doesn't matter. If you don't tell a story, no one's going to care. Story is everything, right? And that's kind of one of the things where I don't necessarily like everything Jim Shooter's written, as some people have kind of noticed in my review of Secret Wars. I gotta finish that damn series. But he knew what the heck he was talking about, and he knew how to run a business that told stories. And yeah, man, I will do a separate video on the other parts of this lecture. But I just wanted to bring up his blog. I think his blog is like a treasure trove of stuff. I love reading through this. I don't necessarily agree with everything, but there's a lot of stuff in here that's fantastic. And if you want to learn about comic book history, from probably one of the more controversial figures in it. I'd say controversial. You can't see my quotation fingers because I don't really think he's that controversial. And I highly recommend you check out his blog. I'll put a link to it in the description. Anyhow, that's part 1. I'll do part 2 and 3 later. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, hit the bell for notifications. If you got any comments about this video, Jim Shooter's blog, or Jim Shooter, or storytelling and writing and comics in general, leave it down below, and I will see you next time.